All right, here's the second half of the right quantity at the right place. So the last two items we're going to cover this week have to do with the role of transportation modes in purchasing. So if you're taking a transportation class, some of this might be a little bit of a review, but this is a nice overview that is necessary for purchasing agents. And we're going to talk about the trade-off principle when it comes to transportation modes. So diving head in, let's look at our objectives of purchasing again. Where does logistics fall in this? Well, if your organization has a strategy that they don't want to spend a lot of money on what they call premium or expensive freight by putting things in the air or expediting them around, your processes and how you order better be right and to avoid those situations as much as possible, as well as making sure you have the right contracts with your 3PLs unless you own them, your own trucking and air freighting. That also has a lot to do with supply continuity. Here's an example before, asking the question of when do you need it? How much you need and when do you need it? Being able to keep the continuity of supply while cutting down transportation costs is a huge factor in purchasing that we need to consider. And then lastly, you have staff moving around the world, coming into your facility, you need to think about how to handle communicating updates effectively and efficiently. It was not uncommon for operations managers to come into my office and say, I need an update on this part. Well, great. I had 13,000 part numbers to manage. All right, well, let's look it up. Do I have to sort through emails? Where do I put this information and tracking? Oh, or do I even have tracking information? That's another thing we got to think about. So transportation, how we move things around, the logistics aspect really matter in the purchasing world. We need to have an understanding. You can't just expect stuff to just show up for no reason and whenever we want it. So some basic understanding of logistics is going to be covered here. Where this fits is still within Chapter 5. In the latter half of Chapter 5, they do start talking about the right place. That's that logistics aspect. So let's start with the trade-off principle. So the logistics system is made up of three major components. You have modes, which is your transportation, which most people think about when they think of logistics. Oh, it's via truck or air or ocean. Modes, that is the mode of transportation, the mode of logistics. You have nodes, which are, consider them like stops along the way. Warehouses, break bulk facilities, so on. Storage and warehousing facilities, stopping points. Then loads, the inventory itself, the product itself that's being moved. So when we talk about a logistics system, we're talking about how it's getting there, that's the mode, where it's going to, the node, and what is moving, the load. So optimizing the structure across the globe of the nodes all over the place and how much you're going to move in the quantity, the loads, you can figure out the right mode to use. Of course, it makes it all nice and fun that all these rhyme, but you get the point. The goal is to minimize cost amongst these network of modes and nodes and loads, but optimizing your ability to meet customer needs. Optimizing, doing the best you possibly can to reduce cost and give them the most amount of service and accessibility to your product. Why does that matter? Well, logistics as a whole add to the cost of products. From a consumer end, we kind of know this, but let's break it down even further. So for a domestic product, something that's made in the United States, you've got your basic costing factors. You've got overhead costs, production costs, material costs, logistics costs, and profit. Whereas you have on a global scale, you have the same kind of things, overhead, production, raw material, and logistics costs. But you notice the little bar to the right for global is bigger? Well, it costs more to move things around the globe as opposed to domestically. The reason why it costs more is there's a lot of handling and a lot of moving as far as having to pay duties, having to pay different governments, having to move different carriers, and so on. We also have profit. Oh, everyone wants to make profit. That's why businesses exist, to make money. But when you talk about on the global scale, you got to make enough to make your domestic profit, but you have export profit as well. So globalization is huge, and we all deal with it. But where we can optimize our logistics costs can save us some money. So moving forward with transportation overview. There are 6 things we look at when we talk about global transportation. So not just domestic, we're talking all around the globe. To minimize our costs as well, we need to understand the speed in which we need things. How fast you need to get here. Not, it would be nice, but when do you actually need to get here? So we can ask ourselves as consumers this. We know that Amazon Prime will get it there in 2 days, but do you really need it in 2 days? Can you slow it down? When are you actually going to use it? Those are the questions we need to know. We need to know the speed. How long does it take to load and unload from start to finish? Dependability. How dependable is that mode of transportation? Sometimes we can even say this with different carriers or providers. How dependable are they on meeting their goals and committed timelines? Capacity is what we're talking about. How much can be moved at one time? Accessibility, the feasibility of routings. Can there be more than one way to go around and get somewhere? Quality, what's the likelihood of the product being delivered in the same condition in which it left your facility or your supplier's facility? And then cost. How much did it actually cost for that service? So the goal and the hardest part that purchasing agents, logistics managers alike share is the goal is to get the highest amount of service utilization at the lowest cost. So being able to understand that trade-off and communicate with your management or even with your suppliers about what the best mode of transport is important. So let's talk about the different modes. We have truck, rail, ocean, air, pipeline, and intermodal. Intermodal, real simple, is just a combination of more than one of these different 5 different modes. So you can have truck and rail, which is usual combination, air and truck, another usual combination, which is a bimodal. Multimodal, say like you need to move it from California to England. You may move it via rail across to Chicago, move it from Chicago truck over to New York. From New York it gets on a boat. From the boat it gets over to England. England it moves to truck. That's multimodal. Now, we don't have to get into that level of detail here, but it's understanding that it takes more than one mode sometimes to get from point A to point B. A little humorous story that I had to deal with professionally as a purchasing manager. I was also acting as the logistics manager for the division at this time, and I was working with a team down in Los Angeles. And new acquisition, I was working with a shipping agent, customer service agent more specifically, and she says, I asked you to move this air. I don't know why it didn't move air. I go and I look at the tracking. I'm like, sure, it moved air from LA to Florida. I saw it. Here's the tracking. And she says, well, I didn't see an airplane come pick it up. A truck came pick it up. She honestly thought an airplane would land in the middle of 154th Street in Los Angeles to come get her material. So I had to explain what multimodal meant at that point. Actually, it was just bimodal because it went truck to the airport to on the plane to Florida, and from there it was delivered to the customer via truck. So just give you an understanding that the people out there think that sometimes, oh, a train didn't show up, so it must not be moving rail. No, that is not the case. Now, looking at these in different way. So we have truck, rail, ocean, air, pipeline, all across the top here. Then you have those categories from speed to cost, and then there's some additional costing information in gray here. What you need to know is where each of these line up when it comes to these 6 different parameters. So speed. When it comes to the fastest speed possible, air is the fastest speed possible. So that's why there's an H for high level of performance for air. Timeliness, very high. They can be right there, dependable. Capacity. However, low performance on capacity. You can't put a lot on an airplane unless you have a dedicated plane, which gets very, very costly. Access is also low. Modesto, California is a beyond point, meaning it's not right next to an airport. Even though we have Modesto Airport, major airport for moving a lot of airlines. So some of the air material. So a lot of the air forwarders consider Modesto a beyond point, meaning you're not necessarily going to get next day service from Modesto to somewhere else. So its accessibility to an airport could be low. Security is a lot higher though, and cost is also high. It is the highest cost of all of these mentioned. Now, going on the other end of the spectrum, you've got rail, ocean, and pipeline that are relatively lower speed. Now, pipeline I can argue is a little faster, but whatever, we'll go with it. This is based on textbook and research here. Lower performance as far as speed. It's going to take longer to get from point A to point B. You have timeliness of availability, and so on. An interesting point about the pipeline. Pipelines are very expensive to start up. You have to dig in the ground or create a network, but they reduce those costs over time with volume. So breaking this down further, let's just look at truck and rail. So truck and rail usually go hand in hand. Thanks to the Industrial Revolution and the whole push here in the United States with the colonization and moving the railroad all the way from east to west, we can move things around the country fairly well moving via rail. It is cheaper than truck. It is slower than truck generally. And you need some accessibility to a rail head. I work for a company now where we have rail heads actually in our building, so that's really cool. I never had that before. It just reduced the amount of time it takes to get on rail. This is rail and truck can both handle bulkier items. Now, you can move via tanker, you can move via rail cars can move vehicles, different types of configurations, so there's flexibility there. Rail is going to be cheaper generally than truck because of the bulkier, slower movement. So things to consider here. Rail from Modesto to Chicago can take 7 days. A truck can take 5. So you're sacrificing a little bit of speed, potentially, for cost. Moving via ocean or waterbound is also relatively slow. I've been asked over my years to speed up a container ship. Yeah, that doesn't happen. I can't speed up a barge, a container ship. I can't even speed up an airplane. I don't know what people were thinking. If I was a superwoman or something, I don't know. But the idea is ocean is a slow plodding path across the waterways. There's also inland waterways, rivers, lakes, bays, like Mississippi River is a major transit for barges, mostly for trash, but whatever, it works. Large variety of different ship types, different vehicles that you can move across the water. Now, where it depends whether you have accessibility to a port. Now, here in California, we have at least 4 that are available to us. Stockton is one, Oakland, San Francisco, and Long Beach. Those are our major ports. Now, what happens when the longshoremen go on strike? These are the people that load and unload. Bad things. Things get backed up. You got to reroute things all over the planet. So, one of my challenges has been, it is September time frame, and I'm like, why aren't we it's taking longer to move things via ocean? The port's backed up. So we got to take into account our inventory levels to handle the longer shipping times. So that's meant moving via ocean or waterborne. Air. Talked about extremely flexible. Great to get into international market space, moving things all over the place. It's low rate of worry and security, but it's very expensive. Now, if you've ever flown on a passenger flight and you're sitting looking out your window, you notice all the luggage goes in first and then boxes. Those are parts. Those are people's product that they need. That could be your next Amazon order. Who knows? Either way, a large majority moves via passenger flights, and it's not a lot of volume because of the space available. So not a lot of volume globally moves via air because it's so expensive. So when we look at this, air is about 5%, 4 to 5% of the total weight of everything shipped internationally, but it's 30% of the value. So we're talking diamonds, we're talking which are high value, low weight. We're talking things like some consumer electronics that are not that heavy. Then eventually they move ocean, so on. Rail, now, despite being able to move bulky, they may move grain or liquids or things like that that aren't as heavy, but they're about 10% of the value. Whereas truck and water move a lot less of the value, a lot more, the weight. Water, more so the weight. We're talking things like vehicles and fun stuff like that. Now, in the last 10 years, this has been the trend. These are our air exports out of the United States, meaning we are shipping outside the United States, moving things like consumer electronics, computers, motor vehicles, so on. They do move via air, but very rarely. And this is the weight, and so on. Now let's talk pipeline. One of the most untalked about, unless you're in the food and beverage end of the house or electricity, the pipelines are very rare otherwise. I talked jokingly about building a pneumatic tube from our facility to our customer's facility so we'd stop paying shipping. That would be a pipeline. It's a continuous flow environment, and there's very limited access, so there's high levels of security, or at least there should be anyway. Once you have an established pipeline, the costs are relatively low to maintain. And once it's in the ground, you're fine. Most common pipelines we think about and we encounter every day are our water, our sewer, and our electricity. So those are the most common. You can also have within food industry, you can have piped in water or product from one facility to the other. Now that I'm in the wine industry, I think about this all the time. We have tanks, and we have a whole career centered around people that their job is to move product from tanks to bottling, underground pipeline, or an overhead pipeline as well. So it's another mode. Intermodal, like I mentioned, is a mix depending on what you combine, rail and truck, water truck, air and truck, whatever it may be. You can have the varying speeds, timeliness, costs, and so on. By combining things, it becomes a little bit cheaper than dedicated. Like if I move air, sometimes if I can slow it down to the airport, then it makes it a little easier. It'd be incredibly expensive to land a plane at your facility, just saying. And that is the scenario that I was dealing with before. So those are the major modes. Why does this matter as a purchasing agent? We know this. Well, if my supplier's in China, I better know the major modes in which the product can come into my facility. And I better know the transit time and the costs and the trade-off. It was not uncommon for me to make decisions where I was saying, okay, how much do I really need? How much can I put on the water, and then move what I really need via air and split it. That way I had that continuity of supply, but I wasn't wasting money on just transportation costs. So you need to have some math down to figure that out. But also you may have intelligent conversations with your leadership on what they should expect as far as cost, service delivery, quantity, and so on. It just makes you a better purchasing agent in general. Also understanding the difference between small package rates and freight rates, meaning palletized freight. Those things can be very helpful being a purchasing agent, which your book covers slightly. So if you have any questions, this is the last slide of the day. Make sure you understand where transportation and bringing product in at the right place is very important to the purchasing role. If you have questions on the trade-off principle of optimizing your service and minimizing cost, please let me know. I'm happy to give you some scenarios here. But I look forward to reading your activities this week and looking forward to our discussion. Thank you and have a great week.